All right, I think our next speaker is ready to go. She is mic'd up and ready to talk to you. So this next talk is called Unlocking the Power of DAOversity, and it will be given by Isla Munro-Hochmayr. So give her a round of applause as she makes her way onto the stage.
Hey everybody. So I'm Isla. I'm one of the co-founders of For the Win DAO. I'm also the grants lead at the SAFE Foundation, which I just joined very recently, and I'm here today to talk to you about unlocking the power of DAOversity. It's a huge passion topic. I also think it's incredibly important to our space, to the entire venture capital space, and yeah, hope you enjoy. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a personal journey and share where we've ended up and what we're now up to it For the Win DAO, but also a little bit how that journey is affecting the way I think about the SAFE Grants program, and hopefully maybe share some lessons for others to apply in their projects. So where it started, I was 23 years old, straight out of university, and had a passion for capital allocation. It sounds like a really boring thing for a 23-year-old to have a passion for, but that came essentially from the realization that where people invest their money and where they allocate their capital is actually a message of how we value things and the things that we value and the future that we want to create. And so I was really excited getting into the venture capital industry, straight out of my master's degree. I'd also studied economics, so I was passionate about the jobs that can be created by startups. Only 20% of employment is actually in startups, but 50% of new jobs are created by startups. So I realized pretty early on that this was an exciting space to be if you wanted to define the future. And that's where I started. Ultimately, getting into venture capital was incredibly exciting. I learned a lot. I spoke to hundreds of founders, many of which were incredible and who I would have loved to fund myself. But I also immediately saw issues with the industry, was very lacking in diversity, massively toxic culture, also just really not good for my health. I was drinking a lot, going out like I was, not voluntarily, it was part of the necessary culture to be sort of working super long hours and then also partying even longer and then getting straight back up and doing it again. And so I had thought about, I also feel a little bit too junior to be in this industry. I want to at some point start my own thing before kind of coming into venture capital and deciding on which founders should be getting capital to build their visions. And so I thought, I don't know, I want to become a founder. I want to maybe do something in fintech. I'll go to a bank, and that's how I'll figure out how to disrupt finance. Ultimately, a very naive decision, I feel. Banking is not the place to go if you want to learn about disruption. But I did learn some useful things while I was in the wealth management industry. I also got a really bad burnout and depression. But the good thing that I took away was that I spent 2 years looking into the data on where if you invest in diverse teams, whether it be diverse startups teams or diverse funds, they actually perform better. So if you invest in diverse teams, they're going to have, on average, 2.5 times more return on your capital than if the team isn't diverse. They're less likely to fail. And they're also going to, interestingly enough, exit on average 1 year faster, which in many cases in the VC world is something that people are looking for. So I had this understanding that diverse-led funds are good for investors. They're also good for society. So when you invest in diverse teams, on average, they perform considerably better in terms of returns to society, not just the financial returns. And that was kind of an aha moment. I was sitting there with burnout, depression, and there were 2 startups that I had scouted for the VC fund that I worked for that they had decided, in their infinite wisdom, were not worthy of investment, but they were becoming billion-dollar companies. And at the same time, I was looking at all of this data, which I'll show you in a moment, that was saying, actually, the VC industry is kind of not working that well. So that was kind of my the emperor has no clothes moment. I may be completely underqualified to start a VC fund, but that's what I'm going to do. So where is the no clothes moment? So despite those statistics that we just saw of if you invest in diverse teams, they're going to perform considerably better, 92% of VC funding is going to all male teams, and it's actually getting worse. And I'm not just talking about gender when I talk about diversity, but often when you have data, it's male, female, and gender-related data. So that's often where you have the best data to prove the point. So 92% of VC funding going to all male teams, 80% of VC funds actually underperforming public markets. And for those of you not finance nerds, VC funds are supposed to do a lot better than public markets, not underperform them. So this is like, okay, VC funds aren't that good. Maybe all of these smart guys that are running them are not as smart as they think they are. Also, I was getting quite passionate about the topic of mental health at the time, and I looked into the data of mental health in founders, and actually it's pretty shocking. 50% of founders suffer from mental health issues at some point. I think they're also about 8 times as likely to have bipolar disorder. And so it's partially a matter of partially a matter of actually the kinds of people that become founders, but it's also about how we treat founders when we invest in them and the kind of journey that founders go on when they have to scale a company. Maybe they've never led a company before, and suddenly they need to lead a team of 100 people. So that was kind of the process, the thinking process I was going through, and then also realizing that unicorns actually kind of suck. So a lot of you may have actually seen this, but for those who haven't, only 7 out of about 87 unicorns in the past number of years have actually ever made a profit, ever. Ever. So while we celebrate these unicorns and they're very exciting and sometimes they create returns, though going back to this, maybe not as many as we think they do, there may actually be better companies to be being funding, and that's kind of the journey that we started to go on. So finally I had a problem worth solving. I'd been kind of worried about, I've always wanted to start something and I've never come up with that thing that I'm committed enough. And unfortunately for me, it was like, let's create a better VC fund. Unfortunately, I say, because disrupting the VC industry is a really hard task. The VC space is very ingrained in its ways, and the entire system is set up to reinforce the existing structures and the existing power. So basically, it kind of came down to 2 things. Who invests defines what we get. So the people on the investment team that you have and the kinds of mindsets and preferences that they have define the kinds of things that get funded and the ultimate future that we live in. But also how we invest defines what we get. If we're looking for fast exits, and if we don't care that the founders have ever had any sort of leadership coaching or training, then we get toxic cultures like, as an example, Uber was very unpopular. We get people that have to work 80 hours a week. We get teams that are burning out. And funnily enough, we also don't get much diversity in those teams. So we went on this kind of design thinking journey of how do we design a fund where the investment team is genuinely diverse, where we don't need to push for fast exits, and where founders are actually valued as humans, and where we invest in their leadership capabilities right at the beginning, before they need to lead a company with 100 people, not after they've already burned out, become depressed, and screwed up the lives of hundreds of employees. And by the way, we also wanted to do this while getting better returns than in traditional VC. So no minor task. And as we kind of went along on this journey, we started building a team to actually have on this fund. And the first major realization that we had was that if you want to build that team, you have to find the people to be in that team that have a track record. Because you're never going to get money from LPs if you don't have a track record. But the only way to get a track record is to get into VC. And who's hiring the people in VC? Goodness, they look all very similar, and they like to hire people that look and sound like them. So the system reinforces the system, and what we really need to do is create a new pipeline of diverse investors. And so there was this moment of we can't just create a fund, that's not going to change anything. We need to find out how to actually increase the pipeline of diverse investors. So yeah, venture capital needs a makeover, and the entire structure of VC funding is broken. And we got a third requirement. Basically, what we get defines who we invest. Therefore, if you take this recipe for VC homogeneity that you have, get funded by people who look and talk like you, build and exit a company, start angel investing with people who also built companies, create a fund with those angel investor friends that all look and sound like you, and then create a fund with those lovely friends and fund people who look and sound like you. This is what you get. That's a great video. Unfortunately, I couldn't link and play it, but this is what most VC funds look like, even though they will make a lot of PR announcements about how they're looking for equal opportunities and diversity. So we added to the wish list, how do we design a new funding model where investors actually can come from non-traditional backgrounds, where they can work part-time, where if they're recovering from burnout and depression like I was, they can still contribute to a fund and not work an 80-hour work week. We also wanted to create a pipeline where succeeding in the old model wasn't the only way of getting in. And honestly, we were really close to giving up. We took about half a year off at one point because it was like, how the hell are we supposed to do this? But then someone told us about DAOs. And it felt at that moment like we'd found the Holy Grail. Everything that we'd been asking the universe for, in a way, suddenly appeared in the form of venture DAOs. The first one that we had seen was the LAO, which was the first venture DAO with a legal entity. And it was really exciting because we had this image suddenly of what the future of investing could look like. And we said the future of venture investing is decentralized. We can do a better job of sourcing deals because we have a much greater pipeline. We have much more investors in a venture DAO. The LAO, for example, had 99 investors. So if you compare 99 investors in a fund to 3 or 4, the amount of diversity that you can get into that fund is just so much greater. We can do better screening because with those diverse investors, 99 people looking at a deal versus 3 or 4, you're going to get a lot more insight, potentially also from experts in a particular space, as to whether that is actually something that you want to invest in and whether the idea has merit and what potential pitfalls might come. But also when it comes to supporting the portfolio that you then have, when you have 3 or 4 investors, there's only so much support you can give. But if you look at a DAO that has 99 investors, and each of those can jump in at a point where it makes sense, or if you look at a DAO with thousands of members potentially, that's a huge difference. And if you get that right, there's a way of actually supporting your portfolio and making the journey of being a founder a much less lonely one. So that was kind of the vision that we got to. But we also realized at about the same time that venture DAOs are still a massive DIY project. We kind of had seen the IKEA catalog, and then we'd gone and bought this thing in our heads, and realized that venture DAOs were very far from being perfect, and that a lot of the stuff that we needed to create the perfect venture DAO still needed to be built. So 3 years in, I'm like a massive Web3 and DAO maxi, but it's been a long journey, and we still have a long way to go, both us as For the Win, but also the space as a whole. And we kind of have this realization that what we need to build is something that makes it easy for people to become investors. So we're talking about the venture DAO use case. One of the issues that we came across was the fact that if you want to be part of a true venture DAO, you have to be an accredited investor. And when we were thinking about how do we make the investment space more diverse, it didn't make a lot of sense to us to actually only onboard accredited investors, because then we're just more or less, again, faced with the same problem of you get what you already have. So we had to think about new ways of thinking around venture DAOs, and For the Win, our solution was that we actually created a social DAO first that anybody can be a member of. And that was something we put together about a year ago, and in the past year we've been building up our membership, and we've been very happy to say we've been growing very well. But we've also been working on an app, and the idea of this app is that actually the whole pipeline of startups, anybody can find a startup. Anybody can suggest a startup. And actually, in the traditional VC world, that's already happening. It's just that at the moment, the only people who are benefiting from finding the startup are the investors. So I would imagine that there's actually a lot of people in this room who have suggested a startup to someone to invest in. But I would imagine that it's a much, much, much smaller number who have ever gotten returns from that, or who have a track record of investing where they can say, I was the first person to notice that startup. So our idea here is to essentially create an app where anybody anywhere can suggest a startup for investment, and they can stake tokens and signal to investors that these are startups worth looking at. And then we as a DAO can have a more curated pipeline that we look through. But essentially, if somebody has signaled to us early on that this is something worth looking at, that there's a bounty and reward system, and that they can build an on-chain track record. So that if that startup that they found in 10 years becomes a billion-dollar startup, they have a track record and can go out and talk about raising a fund. And if we want change in the venture industry, we need more people like that raising funds and less egos. So that's something that we're working on, but this is not the whole answer. It's just one thing. And I also joined SAFE recently, so I just wanted to share a little bit about how I'm thinking about the grants program and how the learnings that I've had from that process are transferring over to the stuff that we're doing at SAFE. So, and these apply generally, so please feel free to steal them for what you're doing. But what do we need to be doing more of? I think we need to be thinking beyond devs. So devs are incredibly important for building the technology that we want to build, but we also need product designers, we need design thinkers, we need UX designers, we need scientists, we need marketers, we need communicators. Like the startups that I've, in my experience, the ones that looked great and also really did great were actually ones that had really great product marketing. And that's something that I don't think many people think about hiring for early on. So let's think beyond devs when we're trying to create a pipeline of talent in Web3. Let's talk less about the technology, less about various roll-ups, and more about real-world problems that we can solve together. Let's create grants teams and councils for grants that are actually more diverse. And that's something I certainly am thinking about, and I notice that many in SAFE are thinking about. How do we actually create a diverse team, and how do we, when we create a council from the DAO, how do we make sure that we get diverse perspectives into that council and not just the same old thing? Also, I think that incredibly useful for many large DAOs is we can actually leverage the wisdom of the crowd. We don't have to do everything as a core team and centrally. We have this incredible community of talent that can help us find great talent. They can help us filter that talent, and they can help us actually foster and support that talent. So figuring out how to do that best at SAFE is something that I'm really excited about. Also just reaching new audiences. I think we spend a lot of time thinking about specific audiences, and that if we broaden that lens, we're going to do a lot better as an ecosystem. And finally, just thinking about DAO governor diversity. How do we actually get people into governance in DAOs? My experience, honestly, is that so many things, even though I was heavily into the Web3 ecosystem, it wasn't actually that obvious to me how to get involved in DAO governance. So I think really promoting, having fellowships, having these things that you don't actually have to be in Web3 for 3 years to find out how to start earning money and becoming a governor and contributing to a DAO in a meaningful way and building a reputation. So I think that's it for today. I just want to leave you with one final thing. Money is more than a transmission of values, my money, but also how do I invest my money and what impact is that having on the world. Thank you very much.
Okay. Look at the...
Any questions?
Should look at the screen. Look at the screen.
Okay, is there a financial literacy gap you have to address when educating for the VC asset class? Absolutely. So one of the things that we've been doing at For the Win DAO in the early stages of building up the social DAO is actually running cohorts of venture capital training for people, targeted to people who've never done anything in the investment industry at all. So we did 8-week cohorts. I think we've done them now 3 times. And we brought in people from Bankless DAO, we brought in people from For the Win DAO, and we had a really diverse bunch of people. Some of them had actually been VC investors before, but they were really interested in what we had to say. Some of them had never touched finance in their lives, and a lot of them found it really helpful. Also, founders actually found it really helpful to understand the way the industry works and to know how things are kind of going. So yeah, definitely there's a huge gap. Also, there's a huge gap when it comes to educating family offices and LPs on investing in Web3 and actually potentially getting involved in Web3. They think it's all scams, and I think there's a lot of work we need to do. When I say talking about real-world problems, I think that we need to do a better job in Web3 of communicating the real-world problems that we can solve. And one of the initiatives I'm actually working on with Victoria is DAOs. So we're trying to sort of disrupt the Forbes 30 and the 30 type model and have a DAO that democratically and transparently curates talent in the Web3 space, so that not just people who are already successful can actually be seen and heard. Any other questions?
There's one over there.
Thank you. Thank you. It's very interesting, but I see that when all these kind of foundings get together and work together, they want to work with you too and integrate with you. What is your approach when you're trying to work with traditional foundings, or are you not doing that?
With traditional funds?
Yeah, because usually there are a lot of people funding these companies.
Yeah.
So at the moment, there is a lot of this kind of funding, so maybe you can integrate with them too. Have you tried?
Yeah, for sure. And that's one thing that one of the reasons that we like the app as a concept is that it's all about creating the pipeline of deal flow. We don't necessarily even have to invest ourselves to create an impact. We can just create a way of making sure that anybody, anywhere that's building a great startup can be found, and anybody who's capable of finding great startups can find them. And so we would like to ultimately use it, have it as like pipeline as a service for funds, but also as individual angel investors.
Hi, how interactive would your social app be? Because there could be like people that want to add a criteria about a specific industry, startups in a specific industry, so that, I mean, how can you make this, how do you think you can make this more interactive or maybe even more adaptive, the social app, let's say from the criterias and filters that you could use?
Yeah.
Are you working with something?
Yeah, no, we're not that far yet, but it's a great question, and I think it speaks to something important that everybody's going to have a slightly different way of doing the VC pipeline. What I would like to create with the app is something that's fairly modular, that we have certain things like first you go to the community or to a large audience, then in the middle there's some kind of curation of a select group, and beyond that it becomes genuine due diligence. But there's many different ways that you could put that pipeline and that flow together, and I would love it to be something that's composable and even maybe open source, that people can actually just build on what we're building.
Okay, great, thanks.
Just Pablo?
Anyone else? Otherwise, thank you very much, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you also to Manu. When we talk about diversity and looking after this space, Manu and ETH Barcelona do an incredible job of curating a genuinely diverse set of speakers and participants. And I'm really grateful to everyone for that. So thanks.